It's February 11th. Welcome to yes2hellwith.com. In 1819, the United States Supreme Court said something most Americans probably have never heard. Quote, "No political dreamer was ever wild enough to think of breaking down the lines which separate the states and compounding them into one common mass." End quote. One common mass. Those words were not poetry. They were a warning. The court understood something we have forgotten. Freedom does not survive consolidation. Freedom survives division. The founders did not create one consolidated national authority over one undifferentiated population. They created separate states, separate jurisdictions, separate spheres of power. They divided authority so that no single force could dominate the whole. Because when all power flows to one center, the people no longer stand as free communities. They stand as subjects of a unified machine. A common mass means uniform control. A common mass means uniform mandates. A common mass means the individual stands alone against consolidated power with no structural shield. The genius of America was not simply a Bill of Rights, it was structure, enumerated powers, reserved powers, dual sovereignty, jurisdictional boundaries. Those boundaries were the walls that protected freedom. When those walls erode, whether by legislation, judicial reinterpretation, administrative expansion, or public indifference, freedom does not collapse overnight. It dissolves slowly, quietly. People begin to identify more with the central authority than their local sovereignty. They begin to believe all law flows from one source. They begin to accept that all mandates apply to everyone equally, everywhere, and without question. That is the psychology of a common mass. And once people think as a mass, they can be governed as a mass. When Americans are treated as one common mass, jurisdictional distinctions disappear. The government no longer establishes authority over distinct sovereign communities. It proceeds by uniform classification. That is how the Affordable Care Act was enforced. The individual mandate did not depend upon individualized proof of federal jurisdiction over each man or woman. It operated on the presumption that all Americans were liable as federal taxpayers and therefore subject to a penalty collected through the IRS. By interpreting the mandate penalty as a tax, the court allowed enforcement to attach to the entire population through the existing federal taxing structure. Universal classification made universal enforcement administratively seamless and easy. Consolidation into a common mass made presumption possible, and presumption made compliance enforceable. Justice Marshall warned against breaking down the lines that separate the states, because once those lines disappear, freedom becomes permission. Once those lines disappear, power centralizes. Once those lines disappear, liberty survives only at the discretion of consolidated authority. Freedom is not sustained by slogans. It is sustained by structure. And when structure fails, no speech, no vote, no protest can fully restore what consolidation has absorbed and destroyed. The question is not whether America once rejected becoming a common mass. The question is whether we have already become one. And if we have, the greater question is whether we understand what that means for freedom. I dare say not. Because freedom cannot breathe inside a single consolidated mass. It can only survive when power is divided, restrained, and structurally limited. That was the warning, and it was given more than 200 years ago. Think about that. And as always, may truth reign supreme.